Who wants to be a millionaire? Everyone does, right? But is it a realistic goal for the average person off the street? Well, the short answer is yes, and in this video I'm going to show you why that is. Using a spreadsheet that I have where I've mapped out my journey to early retirement, I'm going to show you how, by using a few different examples, I can map out a journey for you to be able to be a millionaire before and when you retire. I'll take in examples of different salaries, different starting ages and different pension contributions into the spreadsheet, and I'll work up a few different examples that show the amount of money you might need to contribute if you want to be able to retire as a millionaire, or even if you want to retire early as a millionaire. There's a few assumptions we'll make and I'll go through those shortly, but the spreadsheet will show you exactly how you can map out consistent contributions to get to that goal. And by the end of the video, you'll be able to take this spreadsheet away, you'll be able to create your own version, and you'll be able to work out exactly how much you need to contribute based on your personal situation to become a millionaire by the time you retire. Now, I know that's a lot of suspense and a lot of promise, so let's get stuck in so I can show you exactly how you do it. And before I put the spreadsheet up on the screen, there's just a couple of things that I mentioned based on assumptions that we should just work through and chat through at the start of this video so that you know where some of the numbers and some of the examples and how we're mapping this out, where it all comes from really. So the most important assumption that's going to be need to make for this video and that you need to be aware of is that I'm assuming that you are in some way in control or aware of what's going on with your pensions, because the pension accounts are going to be the key accounts that we use and we're going to be contributing to map out this retirement plan for you. So there's a couple of, I guess that breaks down on a couple of different levels. Firstly is that any pensions you've got from any previous jobs, I'm kind of assuming that you're either at a minimum you're aware of them, or if you're a little bit further on the journey, you've pulled them all together and you know where they are, so you've got control of all of those pensions from previous jobs. And then the second part of that assumption is that you're at least mindful and you know how much is going into your pension a month in your current job. If you don't know those two things, or one of those two things, I definitely suggest after this video, because the video will still be relevant for you, so after this video, going away and just getting in control of those two things, because to be able to reach this £1 million goal that we're going to set out, being in control of your previous pensions and your current pension is going to be essential. The second assumption we're going to make is built on that first assumption. So you've got control of your pensions. You know what at least as a minimum is going on with your pensions. The next thing that you need to look at doing before actioning this £1 million plan is pulling your pension out of its default fund. Now, what I mean by default fund is a standard fund that when your pension gets set up, that is the fund that your company uses, that it puts the money into that you're contributing towards your pension with the pension provider. Those funds are normally set up to be quite risk averse, quite diverse, because they're made for everybody that works for the company. So whether it's Sandra, who's age 60 and looking to retire in 3 or 4 years' time, or Joe, who's just started out working for the company, is 25 and has a long time horizon ahead of him, the pension, the default fund with your pension provider for your company, is made to suit both of those people. But it goes without saying that those two people have very different attitudes towards risk and very different time horizons for how long they need their money to grow over. So Sandra, age 60, will not want risk with her assets because she'll be retiring soon and she wants to be able to use that money to be able to live her retirement. Whereas Joe, who's 25, who's just started the job, has 40 years ahead of him potentially working in the workforce and can afford to take more risk. So by taking your money out of the default fund, you take control of where your money's going and what it's being contributed towards. So that's a really essential point if you want to be able to achieve this £1 million plan that we're going to lay out for you. If you want a bit more information on exactly how to get in control of your pensions, I've done a whole separate video on it. So I'll link that down in the description below, and it might be worth going and checking that out so you can get a little bit more information on how to get in control of your pension. And the last other key assumption we're going to make for particularly some of the calculations we're going to do when this spreadsheet goes up on the screen shortly is that you're going to retire at the age of 67. Now, at the moment, the retirement age in the UK it really depends on what age you are at the moment as to realistically what it's going to be. It could be 65 if you're retiring in a couple of years' time, or 66, or it could be 67 if you're someone like me who's in my 30s, much more likely to be 67 and higher by the time I come on to retiring. For the purpose of this video, we're going to assume the retirement age is 67, so that's how the journey that we're going to map out, and that's what we're going to use as a reference point for being able to retire with £1 million. But that's just some basic assumptions. So let's get the spreadsheet up on the screen now, and I'm going to show you exactly how I work through creating a £1 million plan so that you can create one for yourself as well. Okay, so on the screen now here in front of you, what you have is my retirement plan. So this is a spreadsheet that I have created that's going to form the backbone of today's video, which basically pulls together my exact month by month plan for the next 20 to 30 years of how I'm going to build my wealth and how I'm going to be able, and when I'm looking to retire effectively. So let me zoom in on this spreadsheet for you a little bit here. So let's take it in a few layers. So hopefully that's big enough for you there. We'll sort of zoom in and out as we go depending on different things. But for this one, we kind of want a view where we can get most of the way across the spreadsheet. So really quick, just a minute or two on how this spreadsheet works, because that's going to help us then pull together a plan using a few examples that hopefully one of which will relate to your situation watching this video. So for me, and I'm starting this plan as of this year, 2026. So when I came into this year at the start of the year, when I pulled together all of my pensions I had, so that's why I mentioned at the start of the video why knowing what's going on with your pensions will be so important to be able to create this plan. I knew that I had two pension pots effectively that I needed to pull together. One was my pension pot that is currently with the employer that I currently work for and that I contribute to monthly. And then secondly is a self-invested personal pension, or SIP, that I have, which is a collection of all of my pensions from my previous job, which I have done myself. I've collected them all together, put them into one pension that I have control over so that I can watch that money. I'm not contributing anything to that monthly. That is just a collection of all my old pensions. The only one I'm contributing to is my pension through my workplace. So when I bought those two together at the start of the year, I knew that brought me to £35,884 in all of those pensions. And then what I have done through a little bit of kind of mapping out and working it all out over a period of time for me is map out monthly contributions that I need to make to get to my retirement goal. And ultimately, my goal personally is being able to retire early, aka my investments are making enough money annually to cover my annual salary. So for me personally, that needs to be just over £50,000 a year. That's my current salary. So I need my investments to be making that money. So if we zoom down a little bit here, and then we zoom, let me take this in another level for you as well. So let's take this into 150 on this spreadsheet. So this column here, column O, really important one. That is the amount of growth that my total investments are earning on a yearly basis. So what we need to do is basically when this column reaches £50,000, that is my retirement goal. So you can see I've highlighted that year down here. So that year there is when we reach £50,000 earning from my investments, which if I scroll back across is the year 2046. So that's 20 years from now. So I'm currently 32 at the time of recording this video. So that actually means that I'm on track to be able to be financially independent by the time I reach that age in 2046. So, which is great. That's kind of a great plan to have mapped out. However, the purpose of today's video is working through a time until we get to a total of £1 million in our investment. We're trying to become millionaires. That's what we're planning on doing. So if I scroll down my plan a little bit further and we use column Q as an example, you can see that there's a number here. We cross over between 979,000 and 1,055,000. And that for me will be in the year, if I scroll back across, in 2054. So at that point there, I would be 61, And at that point there is when I would go over the threshold of having £1 million saved up in my investment account. So what we're going to do in today's video is exactly that. We're going to map out a journey depending on a couple of different scenarios that I've got written down, and I'll talk you through them as we go, to how we go from the money we have now to being able to retire as a millionaire. So let me take you across, and before I actually take you across onto the next tab, I should say that these contributions here are all coming from my workplace. So I'm contributing at the moment. My employee scheme is a 6% match pension scheme, so I can contribute. What that means is I can contribute up to 6% myself, and my employer will match up to 6%. So when I'm contributing 6%, they contribute 6, etc., etc. So that's what I've done. I've maxed that out recently. So I'm paying in 6%. They are also paying in 6%, which means 12% of my salary is going into my pension. And then I have a small amount of money that I'm contributing towards stocks and shares, ISA on the side, which is about £150 a month. It varies. So that's the total that makes up these numbers that are being contributed into my account here. So that's just a little reference point. But now I can change over tabs and we can move over to here and we can start building an investment plan. So let me zoom back out again to go through a couple of, that's too far. Let me go through another couple of important points that we'll just need to cover on this tab. So first example is I'm assuming that you are someone watching this video is 30 years old. We'll just call them person A for now, that they are 30 years old. And as I mentioned at the start, we're working on the assumption that they will be retiring when they are 67. So when you do that maths, that works out to be that they would be retiring in the year 2063. So apologies if you're watching this video and you're age 30, because that might feel like a long time away. It might not feel like a very long time away. But yes, 2063, if you're retiring at 67, is when you would be retiring. So that provisionally is what we're working towards. That's the plan we're going to get to 2063, trying to be millionaire from our contributions. So let's assume if you're 30 years old, again, basing a small assumption in that you've had a couple of jobs before and those jobs will have had pension schemes. So let's make a kind of generic assumption that you'd have about £15,000 in those pension schemes. That's a fairly conservative guess for someone who will have been contributing to those schemes without really knowing or actively trying to build their wealth in those schemes. So that's probably a good starting point for us to build this plan out. So if you've got £15,000, you're a starting point. So the next thing we're going to assume is what your salary is. So if we're assuming you're 30 years old and you've got a salary of £35,000 a year, which is the average salary in the UK. That is the average salary. If you took everybody's salary, pulled them together, it comes out at about between 35 and 37 thousand pounds a year. So if your salary is £35,000 a year, and the next thing we're going to assume is that you've got a matched pension contribution with your employer, like I have. So mine's 6%. We're going to assume 5% for this video. So what that means is that if you max out that system, you're contributing 5% and your employer is also contributing 5% as well. So that means that 10% of your income is going into pensions every single year. So what we're then going to assume is that, and that works out, which I can put in here actually, is that your pension contribution is £332 a month. So that's what goes into that cell there, and that is the combined contribution of your half of that. So 166, sorry, no, that's actually 290 that goes into that spot there. 290, 332 is from another example, so apologies. £290, so that's £145 from your employer, £145 from you coming out of your salary. So the first thing we need to do is that we know that we're going to be contributing £290 every single month, so we can drag that all the way across to December. So we know that there's going to be £290 going in every month, assuming nothing changes with your job. Then what we need to assume is a growth rate. So this is a really important point for this spreadsheet, and all the examples we'll use that, is that if you're in the default fund, which I mentioned earlier, the likelihood is that your growth is going to be quite conservative because your pension fund has been built to be conservative, because it needs to work for the example I use of Sandra in her 60s, but also Joe when he's 25. So it finds a middle ground of investing in some risky, some not so risky assets and stocks and shares. Whereas if you take control of your pension, you have a choice of putting it into something like an S&P 500 track fund or a global index fund, something like that, that is a more all-encompassing picture of the stock market, so that you've got a better chance of capturing growth in investments and in the stock market. So if you take an S&P 500 index fund as an example, that over the last 50 years, which I'll pop up on the screen now, pop in front of you, you can see has averaged around about 8% growth across the last 50 years. So that's what we're going to use as our benchmark for annual growth on our contributions to work out how quickly we can get to £1 million. So we've got our monthly contributions. We're assuming a growth rate of 8%. So to work out the growth rate in here, what we're going to do is we're going to sum up all of these cells here. So the starting contribution and all of your individual contributions, we're going to close that off, and then we're going to times it by 0.08 there. And that will give us an 8% growth that you can see in that spreadsheet. So just to, again, to go over that in case you're working along and you're creating this for yourself, you need to sum up all of the sales, so your starting contribution as well as your monthly contributions all in one, and then bring them to a total in your formula, so close out your brackets, and then times it by 0.08 because that is representative of 8%, and that will give you your number there. So then what we need to do is work out, okay, well, we've got our starting, we've got our contributions, we've got our growth. How much money am I on at the end of the year? So to do that, what we need to do is we need to sum all of these cells up again here, like this, and then we need to add on at the end the growth, which goes on there. So if I hit enter on that, so that shows me that we started the year on £15,000. We made all of these contributions throughout the year. We saw growth of 8%, which was 1478, which means that we ended the year on 19,958.40. So that's great. And I'll, just so we can see a little bit clearer as we go along, I'll zoom this in a little bit. So 19,958 there is your target by the end of 2026. So then if we scroll back over, what we want to do is we want to put that number down into this cell. So we're going to go back over here because the end total that we end the year on is what we start the following year on. So we're going to bring that number down, and then what we're going to do is we've got a whole row of 290s, and we're just going to assume that nothing's changed about your salary and that you're contributing those again. So there we go, and they go in there. And then what we can do is we can drag this down here, and that will show you what your growth is for this year. So you notice the growth is higher because you've started with more money. And then we can take the same formula again, and we can drag it down. If I can get the cursor in the right place, we can drag it down there. So by the end of year 2, end of 2027, you're going to be on £25,000 a year. So now you can start to see where we're going with this here. So if you take this number here, so we've got the formatting of where it always equals the cell from the previous year. We can drag that all the way down, and you can see that I've mapped out at the bottom of this spreadsheet all the way your journey to 2063, which is if you were 30 years old and you would be retiring at the age of 67, the retirement age, that is where that would map you out to. Now, all those cells, as you can see, are all empty at the moment. That's because we haven't put the rest of the formula in. So the next thing we can do is we can take this row of 290s and we can drag it all the way down, also until we get to 2063. So that there. So now we've got a full set of contributions, and it's worth noting that we're assuming in here that your salary isn't growing over that time. It's just staying the same. You're just on that average salary of £35,000 a year, and you're consistently contributing that with your employer across that entire length of time. So now we've got all of our contributions in. So now we can do all of our growth. So we'll highlight those couple of cells, and we can drag this down again, and we can drag it all the way down to the bottom. And that will show our growth. Now, the reason why that shows low growth there at the moment is because we haven't got our totals in here, which then pull down to the cell for the following year. So all of these numbers, you see these 278 here, they're just working out the growth on the contributions, but without the starting total. So now this will be the final piece of this puzzle, is we can take these two here, and then we can drag them down. And this will do the magic trick, and this will fill in this spreadsheet completely. So let's go back up to the top. So now you can see we've got a full spreadsheet of numbers here. So let's go back to where we were. We were on, and I'll highlight the cell for you here so that we can work through a year as an example. So we were in 2027, okay? And at the end of 2027, we had £25,313.47. So that number is what then comes straight down here. And as you can see, all the contributions are the same if you go across to end of 2028. That's what your growth is, and that's what your number would be. So £31,096 at the end of that year. So all those numbers filled in very quickly there, and it probably initially throws you with seeing all the numbers. But actually you can see that every line of this spreadsheet is exactly the same as the first line that we started with. It's all formatted to do the automatic numbers for you. So if we go down, what we're now looking for is in this projected total, the point in which that number goes over £1 million. It turns to 6 figures, because then that will be the year in which we would be expecting to make £1 million if we stay on target with this 8% growth rate. So you can see some markers in here. Firstly, in this year here, you go to, so where my cursor is, P15. So that's where you go over £100,000 for the first time. So if we go across, because that's cell 15, That is in 2037. So that's only 11 years from now. If you were to start contributing consistently to your pension, that match number that we said from your employer of 5%, putting 10% into your pension combined, that would get you to £100,000 in just 11 years. That's hopefully a really good pointer to see how your numbers can grow really, really quickly by having control of your pension. So if we go back over again, the next number we're going to look for is when do we get to £500,000. So you can see we get to £500,000 here where my cursor is. That's the first year, row 32 we come across. That's in 2054. So that's in less than 30 years from now. You'll be on 28 years to be precise. You'll be on £500,000. But this is the point where it gets really exciting. So if we go across from here and then we scroll down, only a few years later, so where were we? In row 32 we were there at £500,000 to row 40 reaching £1 million. So only 8 years later, because of the growth effect and the compounding effects that's taken place on your money, it only takes you another 8 years to get to £1 million. And the most important thing is that you reach £1 million before you reach your retirement age of 67. You'd actually reach that number a year early, so you'd have a whole extra year of making more money. Or at that point you can decide, you know what, I think I've done enough, I don't need to work anymore, I can live off of these investments. So, and you can see that number coming down there, that £1 million into your final year. So not only if you're on £35,000 a year, you're 30 years old at the moment, and you contribute 5% to your pension, assuming your employer also matches it, not only can you reach £1 million in your lifetime, you can reach £1 million and even retire a little bit early. How great is that? And that's what I love about this spreadsheet and why I pulled it together for myself, because it really puts into perspective how achievable it is to be able to retire early, to be able to grow significant sums of money. And that's just one example. So if we take what we've learned here and we copy this, let's copy this spreadsheet. I've got example 2 down there, but instead let's duplicate this spreadsheet, which will hopefully give me another tab there. And we'll call this one example 1.1. So let's take that in there, and we'll deselect that from being yellow. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play around with the numbers. So we're going to assume some different things about different ages, and then we can play with these pension contributions. So let's say that you're not 30. Let's say you're in your mid-20s and you're watching this video. So let's say that you're 25. So the first thing to assume if you're coming in at 25, firstly, is that you're likely to have a smaller starting pool of money in your pension. So let's halve that number and let's take that number down to £7,500. Let's say that that's when you're coming into this, and that's how much money you've got so far from the 4 or 5 years that you've been in employment so far contributed to your pensions. The other thing that we need to change is how much you're contributing. So it's probably unfair to assume that you're on £35,000 a year in your mid-20s. So let's bring that down a little bit. Let's assume that you're actually, let's assume you're earning £30,000. You've just managed to breach the £30,000 barrier, I should say. So that's what you're earning at the moment. So if I check my notes, that tells me that going into your pension every single month is £198. So if I put that number in there and I drag that down across all of these cells, we can update this so that they all say 198. And let's drag that across there like that. So they're all now in 198 is what we've got there as a contribution, and you've started with £7,500. So the next thing that we then need to factor in is that obviously you're going to be working longer. So you're 5 years younger than where we are currently. So what we need to do is we need to take down a handful more of these cells to add on 5 more years. So we need to go to 2068. That was 2069. It was close. There we go. So we can delete that row there. So we don't need that. And then what we can do is we can start dragging these formulas down again, and we can take this row here and we can copy them all into here like this. And then we can take these cells at the end and we can drag them down as well. So let's just do that as well. Let's move those to there. And then the all important one, let's take these cells here and let's drag down the number there. And sure enough, as you can see at the bottom there, when you come to retire, now, and really important to consider here, look, we're saying that you're not going to earn any more than £30,000 a year as a salary for the remainder of your working career, which in reality is probably unlikely. But using this example, in 2068, the year you would retire, you would have £1 million and you would again retire with £1 million. That is someone who is currently 25, currently only £30,000 a year, currently contributing less than £200 a month to their pension. That is not a significant amount of money. And if you were someone who was really keen to really do well with your pension and up your pension contribution, so let's say you upped this by another £50, so let's change that to 248. That's how much you're going to contribute to your pension. That's coming from you, not coming from your employer, because of the match scheme that we mentioned. So if we take this down to the bottom here, and then we take it across to here, and we put that in there, you can see that actually you'd have £1.2 million when you come to retire in 2068 at the age of 67. So another great example of how you can really, really multiply out your money just by being consistent with your pension contributions, having control of them, and monitoring your money as it progresses over time. So let's do one more example, shall we? So let's make a copy of the example 1 spreadsheet, because that's going to be better for us for this example. We're going to assume someone watching this video that you're 40, and we're going to look at what you might need to do to be able to reach £1 million. So let's duplicate this spreadsheet again, and let's call it example 1.2. And what I'm going to do at the end of this video is I'm going to put a link to this spreadsheet down into the comments so that you can go into it yourself. All the formatting will be there. You can simply just copy it, take it away yourself, and have a go at creating your own version of this spreadsheet. So hopefully that will be really useful for you for formulating your own retirement plan. But let's go for this as example 1.2. So put 1.1 back that side of it. We go to 1.2 and we'll decolor that cell again because we don't need that. So let's assume this time that you are 40 years old, and actually that you're on perhaps a slightly higher salary because you're in your 40s, your salary has grown. So let's assume that you've got a salary of £42,000 a year. What that means is, and this is where this number came from earlier, is that you're going to be contributing £332 a month into your pension, 166 from yourself and 166 from your employer. Now, it's not unreasonable to assume that when you're in your 40s, you've got a bit more in your pension because you've been working perhaps for 20 years. You've had pensions open that even if you've not been paying attention to, money will have been paid into. So I think a fair assumption here would be that your pensions have currently got £20,000 in. If your pensions are really different, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. If you've not really paid much attention to your pensions, but you've gone back now and you found out that actually you've got £50,000 in there or £40,000, I'd love to hear from you. But for this example, we'll assume £20,000. And then, as I mentioned, the contributions are £332 a month. So let's go and take this down here. So the thing is that if you're, and I should point out if you're 40, is that we'll take that all the way down to there for now and all the way across. So we've got that in. But if you're 40, obviously you are going to be retiring on a slightly different trajectory to someone that's retiring when they were 30 in the example we used before, or 25. So if we look at the bottom is 2063, so if you're 40, you'll be retiring when you're 2053. So let's highlight that comment there, that line there. So we know that's the magical line that we're looking for to get to £1 million when we get there. So we've got our contributions started here, and we've assumed that you're contributing £332 into that pension scheme in itself every single month through your employer and through your own contributions. So if we go across, you can start to see some of the numbers here. And if we scroll down, you can see that actually when we get to that time in yellow, by contributing the 5% from your employer and from you, you won't get to that £1 million. So it's not actually possible by the time you retire. However, don't want you to panic at this stage. Because you now know this and you've mapped this out, you can start to work out what your contributions need to be able to get that number to £1 million for the time that you come to retire. So let's have a play around with it, shall we? So let's assume that you contributed yourself an extra £100 a month, and I'm working through this live with you. I haven't worked this out previously to know what number we need to get to reach that threshold. So we're just going to play around with it to see how much more you might need to contribute to get to £1 million if you're in your 40s watching this video. So if you assumed that you contributed an extra £100 a month out of your own salary to your pension, so that would rise to 432. So let's take that down to the bottom, all the way down here, and let's take it all the way across to here. And then let's go back. So you can see that that number has jumped to 706,317. So that's not bad. We've gone up there another couple of £100,000 just by increasing our contributions by £100 a month. Let's do one more jump and see where we get to. So let's round this out. So let's take this up to 500 exactly. So the extra you're contributing up above your standard contributions and your employer contributions would be, how much would that be? That would be £168 extra that you'd have to contribute. So let's assume this is 500. Let's take this down here. If I could grab the cell, let's grab that there and let's take that down to here. That's the year that we're on. And then let's take it across so that we're over this side. And then we scroll across and we need to finish taking it out accordingly. Sorry, I need to make sure we take that all the way down to the bottom, I should say, rather than stopping it there, just so we know. So let's do that there and that across. So we can see that by changing that to £500, we're up to £800,000 now. So we're getting there slowly. So let's go another 50 again. And I think this might be the one that possibly gets to, in fact, let's go for another 75. I think this might be the one that gets us there. So let's have a look and see. Let's take that all the way down to the bottom and then all the way across to there. 883,000. So we're getting really close now. We're really closing on that £1 million mark. And what you can see is by the age of 69, 2 years after, you would be on £1 million. So we're really not far away at this point. So let us go for one more contribution. So if we took it to the 623 mark, that's £300 more than what you're contributing standard through your pension contribution. So let's take that down first of all to the bottom. And then let's take that across. And then let's see, that will have pretty much got us there by that point. So you can see that come the end of your retirement year, with £623 contributed, you'd be on 942,000. So it really does show with this spreadsheet, firstly, how easy it is to become a millionaire by the time you retire. That's fundamentally the thing that we wanted to lay out when we started. But secondly, what the contributions are, what you need to do as a person, depending on where you are in your life, when you want to retire, how old you are at the moment, all of these things, it allows you to play around with this spreadsheet and work out exactly what you need to do to reach £1 million. So yeah, it really is that simple and really is that achievable. As I say, I'll drop a link down to this spreadsheet in the comments below so that you can literally take this with its formula, you can have a go yourself and mapping out your £1 million journey. Please do let me know in the comments when you've mapped out your own journey, what you think of it, if you think it's realistic, you think you're going to be able to achieve it, because yeah, I'd love to be able to hear from you on how you think you're going to achieve that goal and what you're going to do to get there. So there you have it. That is how you can map out for yourself your journey to becoming a millionaire by the time you retire. Hopefully that video was really useful, and hopefully in particular that spreadsheet was really useful for you to just show out how you can do a simple bit of math, simply laying out in a spreadsheet to work out exactly how you can build your wealth to be a millionaire. It's not an exact science. There are things in there that need to be factored in, like obviously fees for any of the accounts that you're using. It's not consistent that the stock market will grow 8% a year if you're investing into one of the funds I mentioned at the start. There's lots of variables in there. But what this spreadsheet does is give you a target to be able to aim for at the end of every year so that you can see if you're ahead of schedule, you're behind schedule, if you want to top up any more money into your account to be able to hit that marker that you've set yourself of becoming a millionaire in the future. So hopefully, as I say, that video was really useful. If you want to see more content like this on how to map out finance plans, how to become a millionaire, be able to retire early, side hustles, budgeting, all of those good things, then that's exactly what we cover on this channel. So please do make sure you subscribe, drop down any comments on what you think of today's video, and do give it a like as well, because it really helps. But other than that, that's really all from me today. Hopefully you found it useful, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one.